Our last story today concerns GMOs, genetically modified organisms. It might be more accurate to call them genetically engineered, but the GMO label has stuck. Opposition to GMOs is heavy in Europe, where recently just a second variety of GMO corn was approved for use, that after a 12-year battle. Market to Market's Paul Yeager examines the status of the continuing controversies surrounding genetically engineered crops.
In the early 1970s, scientists found a way to add microscopic strands of genetic material from one species to that of another. For the first time, two or more species DNA, the genetic material that dictates how an organism looks and acts, could be linked in a lab in a way that wouldn't happen naturally. 25 years later, U.S. farmers began planting crops that were considered transgenic, meaning they contain genetic traits of other organisms. The innovation opened a world of possibilities for improved food production, but it also drew fire from critics.
I think the agricultural world was pretty excited because this was a quick way of making modifications to a plant that could not have been done before. There was a small segment that was concerned because it's easy to think of some horror stories that, how plants could be modified in a way that could cause problems.
Despite some reservations, the amount of farmland being planted with genetically modified or GM crops has grown steadily since their commercial introduction in 1996. According to a leading biotech advocacy group, a record 18 million farmers in 27 countries grew biotech crops in 2013.
There was not adoption in other places like Europe, where farmers and the public were not in support of these technology and these crops. And so there have been very little adoption in Europe. There was large adoption in South America.
As the technology spreads, scientists are watching the responses of certain plants and insects to biotech crops. The concept of natural selection, in which only organisms that are best adapted to their environment survive, comes into play. Individual weeds may have traits making them less susceptible to herbicide. And the International Survey of Herbicide-Resistant Weeds revealed that 232 weed species have shown resistance to at least one type of herbicide.
We need to find other ways to fit into the current production system for farmers to control the weeds, because we've selected weeds that are highly adapted to herbicides and evolved resistance very quickly.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration believes many genetically engineered products are similar to their conventional cousins. And the onus is now on the company marketing the food to ensure its safety. Nevertheless, some believe the federal government needs more rigorous approval standards.
We've looked at the safety data for the current crops that are grown in the U.S., and we're comfortable telling consumers that the foods made from the currently genetically engineered crops that farmers are growing in the fields in the United States are safe to eat. We do feel that the Food and Drug Administration, whose job it is to ensure that we have safe food here in the United States, that they haven't done an adequate job of oversight of those genetically engineered crops. Their regulatory process is a voluntary consultation process. They don't have a mandatory pre-market approval process.
Major developers of genetically modified seed face sharp criticism over potential risks of their products. But officials at DuPont Pioneer, a leading seed producer, say their approval process involves 150 tests and requires an average of 13 years and $130 million.
I think the European regulations use what we call the precautionary principle, which in a way of speaking is, since we don't know for sure, let's not use the technology. That's the precautionary principle. If we were to use the precautionary principle in our lives on a regular basis, we would probably never get out of bed in the morning. One would be correct to state that we don't know for sure, but we know with a fair amount of certainty that we're in a good spot here with this technology.
Some states and consumer groups are seeking mandatory labeling of foods containing genetically engineered ingredients, while others insist the government should be more involved before products hit the grocery store shelves.
Our view is if you're worried about the safety of these foods, you shouldn't be trying to get mandatory labeling. What you should be doing is trying to get FDA more authority so they can determine whether these are safe before they get to market. Determining safety after they're at market with labeling is the wrong way in our mind. That's the wrong public policy.
Those developing new GM crops, however, argue that lives are already being lost due to bureaucratic red tape. At the dawn of the 21st century, nearly 1 billion people all over the world were hungry. Since the United Nations projects world population will exceed 9 billion by 2050, the agency is calling for a 100% increase in food production by mid-century. According to the UN, 70% of the additional production will be realized through the use of efficiency-enhancing technologies. And proponents believe genetic engineering offers a way for crops to be grown on land previously viewed as unsuitable for food production.
It's a challenge that I've come to call the single greatest challenge in human history. Can our planet produce enough grain and cereal and food sustainably to feed the 9+ billion people who will be on our planet by the year 2050?
World hunger notwithstanding, some caution that U.S. farmers are overusing GMOs in some regions and may need to consider alternatives.
With any technology, whether it's genetic engineering or other kinds of varieties and that farmers have adopted, one has to use them in a judicious fashion, an integrated fashion, in a sustainable fashion. And what we are beginning to see is that farmers have not done that with these genetic engineered varieties, and we're beginning to see that they've overused them and abused them. It's just one tool in the toolbox that scientists can use to help farmers do their job.
For Market to Market, I'm Paul Yeager.
And you can watch this story again on our Farmweek website. That's farmweek.msucares.com. We will have a link to the Market to Market website where you can read the story as well as read the script. You can also find us on Twitter at twitter.com/farmweek. And Leighton, it just seems like the people who are against GMOs are over here and the ones who are for them are over here, and there's just no middle ground.
No compromise coming.
And it may be what's going to happen is whoever has the greatest numbers, if they demand that I want non-GMO, that may drive it regardless of whether you think the science is there or whether you think the science is not there. It's just going to maybe the force of public opinion that ends up making things different. But we do have those 35 years, we're only about 35 years away from 2050. So we're going to have to come up with some food from somewhere.
That's for sure.